Good evening. I'm Jim Zirin. This is The Digital Age. Tonight from the UN, we have a special show for you. A conversation with UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. Ban Ki-moon was appointed Secretary General in January of 2007 for a 5-year term. Next year, he must contemplate the possibility of his re-election. Mr. Secretary General, we are honored to have you with us.
It's a great pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
Now, you're the 8th Secretary General in the 65-year history of the United Nations. The first Secretary General, Trygve Lie, said it's the toughest job in the world. Do you find it to be the toughest job in the world?
Certainly, it is quite a hectic, tough job for the Secretary General. Now, my mission is that how to make this so-called mission impossible job a mission possible and mission achievable. But this requires strong support from all member states of the United Nations.
Yes. Now, your management style as Secretary General has been contrasted frequently with that of your predecessor, Kofi Annan, who was known to be quite outspoken on world issues and critical of world governments. You're thought of more as understated and behind the scenes. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
Every leader has a different leadership style, even lifestyle. Therefore, one should not look at from one particular aspect. I try to employ both public debate, public diplomacy, and quiet diplomacy, depending upon whom you are dealing with, at what time and where. This is quite difficult to balance. In many cases, when you are dealing with the very sensitive issues, very difficult people to, then in such a case, quiet diplomacy behind the scenes may be more effective and more powerful. And it has proven to be so. Many governments, many leaders have made their concessions and listened to United Nations calls to be more democratic and to respect and promote human rights. That's what I'm going to do. But please do not misunderstand that I'm always doing on a quiet style. I have been spoken out whenever it was necessary, particularly when it comes to human rights, which is universally accepted principles. So that depends upon the circumstances.
Now, you have a long and distinguished career in public service. You were Foreign Minister of South Korea, Republic of Korea, and you were Chief of Staff to the President of the General Assembly, starting in 2001. But even before that, when you were 18 years old, you were here in the United States. Why don't you tell our audience about that?
I was a high school senior when I was selected as one of the Korean Red Cross students representatives. And I was invited by American National Red Cross Societies, and I was given a unique opportunity of travel around the United States during summer vacations. Then in Washington, D.C.,
this was in 1962.
1962, August. Together with around 100 international students, I was invited to the White House and had again the very unique opportunity and honor of meeting President John F. Kennedy at the time. It was the most inspiring moment for a young boy who came from a totally devastated country, Korea. That really gave me an inspiring moment to think about what can I do, what should I do for my country, Korea, which was very poor after Korean War. That led me to serve as a Secretary General now.
All right, so now you're Secretary General, and already representatives of major powers are talking about reforming the United Nations. President Obama, in his recent trip to India, said he wanted India to become a permanent member of the Security Council. He didn't say whether or not he would give them a veto, but he said they should move toward permanent membership. What are your views on that?
The Security Council reform is one of the most important reform agendas of the United Nations, considering the dramatic and tremendous changes in international political scenes. It is necessary, and everybody agrees that the Security Council should be reformed in a more representative, democratic, and transparent manner. Member states have been discussing this matter during the last 20 years. But most importantly, recently, the General Assembly has taken this Security Council reform agenda in an informal negotiating format. Now they are accelerating this process. Everybody agrees that Security Council should be expanded. However, for the exact modalities, how many seats should be expanded and who should be represented there as either non-permanent or permanent members, those kind of exact modalities should be further discussed by the member states. As a Secretary General, I'm in the position to facilitate such dialogue. This should be determined by the member states.
Now, you just returned from Seoul, where you participated in the G20 discussions, the meeting of the world's wealthiest nations. Probably 85% of the wealth of the world was there in one room with you. What's your sense of what came out of those meetings? They were discussing the global economy. They also discussed currency wars and adjustments between deficit nations and surplus nations.
G20 Seoul Summit was a great success in terms of substantive discussions on development agenda and all other international economic reforms and addressing financial crisis. But in terms of also organizing and proceeding of all this, summit was a perfect one. G20 has established themselves as the premier forum in addressing international economic issues, and their decision takes a significant impact to all international economic order. In that regard, the United Nations has been working very closely with the G20 leaders. There were intense discussions on currency exchange rate and how to deal with the trade imbalances. All these issues will have to be further discussed in France next year. As a Secretary General, reflecting all the wishes of the United Nations, I focused on development agenda. For the first time again in the G20 history, the Seoul government has taken development item as high on the agenda. They have adopted Seoul Development Consensus. I'm very much encouraged that this development Seoul Consensus will work as in a mutually reinforcing way with the plan of actions adopted by the leaders during September Millennium Development Goals Summit meeting.
Were you at all disappointed that China didn't commit itself to a greater degree on letting the yuan float free? And President Obama said that the yuan was undervalued and there should be a higher valuation which would influence exports.
This was again discussed seriously before and during the summit meeting, particularly before the summit meeting was held in Gyeongju. There was finance ministers and governors of central bank meetings. There, they agreed that this exchange rate issue should be determined by the market economy. This issue will be further discussed in Paris next year.
Was there a sense at all among the ministers that the global financial crisis is behind us, so there's not so great an urgency in negotiating specific programs?
It's true that we see some green shoots of recovery around the international community, but the general sense and feeling of world leaders in Seoul was that they should address these international economic issues with a sense of guarding against any recurrence of this financial crisis. I think that is a very good attitude. President Lee, while summarizing this meeting, saying that while we see some recovery signs around the world, but we should always be very vigilant and address this issue in internationally coordinated manner.
Now, also in Seoul, President Obama was seeking a trade pact with Korea. And I don't know whether you were privy to those negotiations, but the report was that they failed to achieve agreement. Are you optimistic that agreement can be achieved in the future?
I'm optimistic that this free trade agreement between the Republic of Korea and the United States will be eventually agreed upon. In my previous capacity as Foreign Minister of Korea, I dealt with this issue. I was a bit disappointed that during President Obama's visit, both countries were not able to finally agree on detailed matters. But however, considering the size of economy of both the United States and the Republic of Korea, it would be mutually beneficial to have this FTA between the two countries as soon as possible.
Free trade agreement.
Yes.
Now, was there any sense in your travels that President Obama was weakened politically because of the U.S. midterm congressional elections and the result?
I have not seen such kind of things. President Obama was as active, as respected as before, and he was in the center of all the discussions. And United States is, by any standards, the leader of international politics and economy. Therefore, his presence, his contribution was greatly appreciated.
If we may, I'd like to move on to Afghanistan because you're about to play a role there as well. The conferences and NATO conferences in Lisbon on Afghanistan, a plan that combat troops, U.S. combat troops included, will be removed from Afghanistan by 2014 over a 4-year period, following the Iraq blueprint of surge and then withdrawal of combat troops. Can the UN play a role with Afghanistan's neighbors in having a political framework to resolve the crisis?
United Nations involvement and role in Afghanistan has always been very important, and we have been playing a coordinating role, particularly when it comes to socio-economic development of Afghanistan. As you know, there was a very important ministerial meeting last July in Kabul, where I attended together with Secretary Clinton and all other distinguished foreign ministers there. Our agreement is that by 2014, while international community continued to support Afghanistan government socio-economically and politically, then Afghanistan government is expected to play more ownership role. And by the end of 2014, we expect that Afghanistan government will play on their own the security as well as the socio-economic development issues. Before that and after international community is required to provide assistance in line with the national priority of Afghanistan. They have been discussing so-called exit plans by 2014, but this exit plan should be made in a gradual way, considering the circumstances of Afghanistan. We also support reconciliation efforts by President Karzai, and this should also help in establishing more secured way the security and peace in Afghanistan. We will discuss on the margins of these NATO summit meetings.
So President Obama's pledge, or apparent pledge, that combat troops would be withdrawn in a year and a half, which he made about 6 months to a year ago, it will not be fulfilled. But you do see that the parties are working toward a withdrawal over a 4-year period.
As a Secretary General, I'm not in a position to say anything about the detailed withdrawal plan of U.S. government. However, I expect that these withdrawal plans will be made in accordance with what we had already discussed last July in Kabul. Yes.
Now let's move on to Iran. You have met President Ahmadinejad. What do you think Iran is up to in the region and in the world? Do you think that they have militaristic ambitions?
Yes, I did meet with President Ahmadinejad of Iran last September on the margins of General Assembly. I urged him that, first of all, Iran should try to resolve these Iranian nuclear issues together with P5+1 countries, and he should, as soon as possible, join this negotiation. I expect that early in December, this P5+1 will engage in negotiation with Iran.
Those are the meetings in Istanbul.
Yes, that's right. And I urged strongly that Iranian government should fully comply with the relevant Security Council resolutions. Now, I have emphasized that whatever they have a nuclear development program should be a peaceful one, and the onus is on Iranian side to prove that their nuclear development program is genuinely for peaceful purposes.
You said that to Ahmadinejad?
Yes, I did.
What was his reaction?
He explained his positions, but I do expect that all these differences of opinions should be resolved peacefully through dialogue in the forthcoming negotiations.
And speaking of negotiations, what about Israel-Palestine? There's a very recent report that Israel's agreed to freeze further settlements for 90 days. How do you see that playing out?
About a week ago, I met Prime Minister Netanyahu in New York, and we discussed, at length about the way how international community expects that this peace process should continue. I have emphasized again that this settlement should be continued to freeze, and I sincerely hope that the Israeli government will be practically addressing this issue, reflecting the wishes and will of whole international community that we want to see peace in the region. At the same time, we also hope that the Palestinian side should also be flexible so that both sides can return to negotiation as soon as possible. The idea of having a 90-day freeze on settlement, that is something which could help in resumption of the peace talks between Palestinians and Israelis.
So you regard it as a step in the right direction?
Yes, I think so.
Let's go on to China. I mean, China has roiled other Asian nations with the flap with Japan over the Senkaku Islands, and then also their claims to land in northern India. Do you see that China's posture has changed and that they are becoming more hegemonic rather than the kind of bide and hide approach that Deng Xiaoping advocated?
The relationship with China and with other countries in the Northeast Asia, with Japan and Republic of Korea, and also their relationship with India, have very important implications for the peace and stability in the region. Therefore, as the Secretary General of the United Nations, I would hope that all these differences of opinions should be resolved through dialogue in a peaceful manner. That's what I have been urging all the times. Yes.
So it's Winston Churchill, jaw, 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 instead of war, war, war. It's certainly the approach. What about North Korea? What do we know about Kim Jong-un, the son of Kim Jong-il, and what his posture is going to be?
It seems that this power succession is now taking place in the DPRK. I have been very closely following the situation there. As one of the Korean citizens and also as Secretary General of the United Nations, it is natural that I have a keen interest to see the peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula. It is absolutely necessary that there should be peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula. And I had good discussions with President Lee of Republic of Korea while in Seoul. We discussed how South and North Korea should promote more reconciliatory relationship through exchanges and cooperation. The recent family reunion between the South and North separate families was a very encouraging one. I hope this kind of reconciliatory movement will continue. At the same time, it is also very much important that the six-party talk should be resumed. There was a very unfortunate incident which happened over the sinking of South Korean naval ships. We sincerely hope that, first of all, this kind of incident should never happen again, and there should be more dialogue, and this, through six-party talks, the denuclearization process of Korean Peninsula should be further accelerated.
Russia, the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, the START Treaty, the Senate will be shortly considering ratification of the treaty here in the United States. Do you support the treaty?
Yes, I support it. I have always commended very highly the political leadership of both President Obama of the United States and President Medvedev for Russian Federation. This is one of the visible leadership role that world leaders can play to realize the world free of nuclear weapons. This free of nuclear weapons is one of priorities of the United Nations and also myself as a Secretary General.
And also the treaty contains a rigorous inspection regime, which Russia has never agreed to before. And this should be very valuable, should it not?
That is something which needs to be determined and discussed between the parties directly concerned. I'm now talking about in principle the matters. Recently we have seen encouraging development of the situation in the area of nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. President Obama last year convened for the first time the historic Security Council summit meeting on nuclear disarmament, and there was a very historic world summit on nuclear security in Washington, D.C. This is a quite important and encouraging development. I have made my 5-point proposals on October 24th in 2008, and I'm very much encouraged that my 5-point proposal for denuclearization and non-proliferation is getting wide support from many countries in the world.
If we may briefly move on to climate change, which has been one of your priorities. 2010 may be the warmest year in the history of the Earth. And we had talks in Copenhagen, which seemed to have collapsed. Are you optimistic that the countries can be brought together, particularly the industrialized nations, on climate change?
The climate change has always been top priority of the United Nations. And United Nations, under my leadership, has been able to bring this climate change to the top agenda of the international community. This Copenhagen conference was not able to meet the expectations of everybody. That may be true. However, Copenhagen has set a very important foundation upon which we can build. This is what we are now trying to achieve in Cancun next month.
Cancun, Mexico.
Yes.
Mr. Secretary General, I'm afraid we have to wrap up. This has been absolutely marvelous. And Franklin Roosevelt said the Secretary General is the world moderator. He was one of the principal architects of the United Nations, and I can see you have so much on your plate and you're such a world moderator. Thank you so much for coming by.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for coming by. Tune in next week for more on the digital age. For the digital age, I'm Jim Zirin. Good night and all the best.